Hello everyone, welcome to the show. It's Monday the 21st of September and this is episode 88 of the Meet the Farmers podcast with me, your host Ben Eagle. Because there was so much in it, we're going to dive straight in with today's feature interview. Last week I spoke to Mr. Mark Buckingham.
Meet the Farmers Friends.
This evening, I am speaking to Bayer's UK and Ireland corporate engagement leader and former public affairs manager for Monsanto, Mark Buckingham. I'm really pleased to have him on the show. Mark is speaking in a personal capacity tonight. I've just got to say that. Mark, thank you so much for coming on and giving us some of your very valuable time. How are you doing? And how's lockdown been for you?
It's good, Ben. No, thanks very much for having me. Yeah, it's been interesting, hasn't it? Very different working from home, so no travel. My job involved quite a lot of up and down to London and a little bit of around the country, and not having that, was a big change. And the family being at home, working from home, so yeah, lots of changes, but it sort of worked. I'm lucky that our industry, has carried on, and my role has been able to carry on. So I'm fortunate and grateful for that. And I haven't had COVID-19 yet, I don't think. So got away with that so far as well. So yeah, so far so good. But very different times, aren't they?
Tell me about your early life. Let's dive straight in there, and how your interest in farming and the environment began.
Sure. I'm not sure I can pinpoint it exactly. That my dad is a retired chemistry professor from Cambridge University, so a good scientific grounding sort of at home, but not agriculture. Although, funny enough, my granddad, his dad, was a manager for Dalgety's in Sydney, Australia, in their pedigree merino sheep business.
Right.
So there was some agriculture there a generation back. Yeah, I was drawn to sort of agriculture and rural business as a career idea, and I did some farm jobs out here in the Fens near Ely when I was at school in summer holidays, and that was great, fantastic experience, and nice work. So that was it really, the start of sort of thinking about agriculture as a possible career.
Yeah. So you've literally come home then, actually, because you've lived all over the world, but you're still back in the Fens then.
Yes, exactly. I know that's a bit of luck. So I sort of had to take that was with Monsanto. I had these opportunities to move, and was able to do a lap of the world and get back to UK. And then lo and behold, Monsanto's UK office was still. So when I left, it was Trumpington PBI.
Yep.
And then when I came back, we were out at Camborne. So I was able to still live in Cambridge, which was just a bit of luck.
Let's hone in on your Reading days. You told me before you started recording that you actually have a normal weekly call on a Wednesday evening with all your Reading fellow alumni, I suppose, all your old Reading mates.
A few. It's the WhatsApp group is Reading Uni rowing mates. Yeah, from the late 80s and early 90s, and that's fun. So we got that going, or I joined, I should say, particularly in lockdown. They've been going a bit longer, but that's a lot of fun. And so I read straight agriculture and then specialised in agricultural management, and it was a fantastic course, especially in my first year, I should say. After that, I rather got into rowing and got a bit distracted from work. But I didn't have a good career plan, and I landed on being a land agent. And the best way to do that, because I hadn't done the estate management course at Reading, was to go to Cirencester, and a new course they'd just started, a postgraduate course. With spending 1 year on that, you could jumpstart your Royal Institution of Chartered Surveyors exams.
Which I think they still do, don't they?
They do, and it's become a proper postgraduate sort of qualification. When I did it, it was a postgraduate diploma. And it was the first year they ran it. And that was actually really good. I enjoyed it. I stopped rowing and really focused on the course. And it was a great group of people because it was the first year doing it. So everyone was quite keen. And I think the university was keen too. They were enjoying teaching it. And I got into the work and really enjoyed that. And then I became a land agent with Bidwell's in Cambridge and had 2 years in Cambridge and 2 years in Norwich. So that was my first career step. So I got a job. I got a job, and I had a couple of job offers leaving Cirencester, which was great. So it worked. But I have to say, land agency is not a, or it wasn't in my experience back then, some time ago now. The size of the firms and the sort of career path available, there wasn't a huge amount of opportunity. So I didn't feel I could progress. And I was sort of hunting around for something, and I was planning to ride my motorbike to Australia or something.
Awesome.
And I thought I knew that was a kind of cop out. And so I wasn't completely happy with doing that, but I wasn't terribly excited about carrying on being a land agent. And then I discovered Nuffield scholarships, and I thought, this is amazing. This is amazing. You can travel and do something productive for your CV. Because I was very conscious that all my rowing had been great and good for me, but not so brilliant for my CV or my career planning. Nuffield was really exciting, and I think I might have got £500 from MAF, from the Ministry of Agriculture, as a kind of, they had a little fund, and I got a little bunny from the Maltsters Association of Great Britain, and one or two other little grants, so I was able to extend my trip. And I did the potential of China as a grain importing country,
right,
and looking at potential of grain exports from the UK, because one of the farm management agreements I was involved in as a land agent, it sold the malting barley way in excess of the budget, and I said, how do you manage that? And the farm manager said, oh, it's demand from China. And I couldn't believe it, that this farm in Norfolk, they'd blown the budget positively on malting barley thanks to demand from China. So that's what sort of got me interested. And I also noticed as a land agent that good information on the grain markets, farmers liked that they pricked up their ears. If you knew what you were talking about on what's moving the market, why are prices where they are and heading where they're going, that was a good area of expertise. So I wasn't necessarily thinking about leaving land agency when I did it, but I wanted to just gain some more skills and experience and do something a little bit different.
Okay, and focusing on your Nuffield, what were your key conclusions that you took out of that time? And I always find it really interesting with Nuffields as to they then look into a crystal ball. In your case, you've had a fair amount of time since then to reflect and look at the changes. Did any of your predictions come true?
I think so. I haven't reread my report recently, but
I tried to find it, but in vain.
Oh no! Okay, I've got a hard copy. I've got some hard copy still. I remember commenting on GM crops actually, and saying this is exciting, but farmers need to make sure that the technology is not introduced entirely on the terms of the developer, which I wasn't working for Monsanto at this stage. And I thought, in hindsight, that's quite an interesting comment. But my main conclusion was that there is this amazing potential demand in China. So I did my Nuffield in 1996, 97, and demand was clearly rising, but it's risen a lot since, and just based on population times income. So really understanding that and seeing that dynamic. They were going from something that was really probably, if you were poor, you couldn't afford a beer, it was out of range. But then the first product they might go for was something that cost about 1 or 2 pence a bottle. I did a few pages on this in my report, in our money, but that was a decent amount of money for them, for poor Chinese, and it wasn't very nice, but it was beer. And the fascinating thing was that the brands, Western brands like Foster's, I went to the Foster's brewery at that time in Wuhan, and they couldn't make something they were happy to call Foster's for a price that could compete. So the Foster's would sell for maybe 50 or 60p a bottle, I think, if I recall. Again, I haven't checked these numbers, but it was way in excess of the basic Chinese product, and it was a much, much better product. But they couldn't make a profit at that price. And because there were Chinese beers that were maybe 10 or 20p a bottle, which were very nice, still probably not as nice as Foster's, but they weren't like the 1p ones.
Yeah.
So if you were Chinese, you'd be very happy with the 10p bottle, and you really wouldn't buy a 50, 60p Foster's. So there was a real challenge for the Western brands. They were very attracted by the scale of the market and the growth, But at that time, 20 plus years ago, the market didn't work. The economics wasn't working. But all the brewing know-how, the Chinese wanted to know how to make malt, how to brew beer, how to market, bottles. They wanted to know all the commercial secrets. So it was a real challenge for the companies coming in. But nonetheless, beer was being consumed, so malt was in demand. So as growers around the world, be it Canada, Australia, or Europe, there was increasing demand, and that's continued.
You clearly you moved into broadly marketing communications as a sort of sector, I suppose. Where does that interest come from? Is that something that's developed or something you've been interested in for quite a long time?
I think it developed. So when I came back from my Nuffield, I was fortunate to get a job with a grain trading company, banks, Sydney Sea Banks in Sandy, and I was their economist. It was really a marketing role. You had to. My job was write some notes for the traders every morning on what's happening to the pound and why, and what Chicago did overnight, and what we think Life and Matif's doing, this morning, and then write a weekly note for growers, if I recall, or a regular note for their grower customers, and then a newsletter for their grain pools. So that was really marketing communications, although it was based on the knowledge I got about grain markets from my Nuffield. It was marketing communications, and so that's really where I really started getting into it. And then a job came up after I'd done that with banks for a couple of years. A job came up with Monsanto.
Okay, so we're now moving into the late 90s.
Yeah, exactly.
99.
Exactly. And you have done your research.
I try.
So I wanted to work for a large company. I'd again, thinking about my career, I thought, and speaking to friends who worked for bigger businesses, the sort of career options and choices and their training capacity and opportunity to give their employees opportunities seemed to be stronger in larger businesses. And there are trade-offs and disadvantages, but that's definitely an advantage, and I think that's still the case. That there's more likely to be an opening that you have a chance to compete for. So I was keen to work for a large business, and I'd met Monsanto on my Nuffield very positively. I heard about them as this big company, and I remember back in Norfolk when I was being a land agent, I joked with farmers about, if you had weed problems in your cereals, you'd want Roundup Ready wheat, wouldn't you? It was that was something we joked about in the late 90s, mid 90s. So the chance to work for Monsanto was very exciting, and initially it was just a UK job as a contractor, so not a full-time position, being communications manager for the launch of the Latitude fungicide product for take all in wheat. And that was fascinating to sort of understand take all. And because there hadn't been a product to manage it, the only management was rotation or trying to go for continuous wheat and get some equilibrium with the fungus. So that was a really interesting communications challenge.
Yeah,
and then,
I was going to say, I mean, just zooming into Monsanto at that time, what was their sort of brand message? What were they trying to aim? What were their aims? What were they trying to achieve at that time?
So I joined in 1999, and the focus of the business was 100% on seeds and traits, shifting from what had been chemistry. That Monsanto had been buying and competing to buy seed companies, and had bought PBI in Cambridge for its wheat germplasm and library, and bought DeKalb, a big corn and soybean seed company in the US, and one or two others. And was looking to use those as a platform to breed and to bring in GM traits to add value to those seed businesses. So that was the direction of the company, 100%, to use new breeding technologies, particularly GM, to bring new value to seeds, and that they succeeded. I think it was, that they had a very, very strong commitment to that technology. One of the first successful transformations of a plant back in 1983 had been done by scientists in the Monsanto lab. So they were very early in investing in GM technology. And I was in this little chemistry bit in Europe, so you could tell where the action was in the company. And luckily, and I knew I only had a contract position on Latitude, so but once I was in, I was able to see kind of what opportunities were coming up, and a media communications job came up in St. Louis, US, which I applied for. And lo and behold, I got it. So that was fantastic, exciting, and my wife kindly agreed to give up her job.
I always find it really interesting when you speak to people who've moved, particularly from the UK to the US for a time. Were there any adjustments culturally, I suppose, that you had to make, or things that you were surprised by living there?
I mean, definitely the biggest cultural one was this Midwestern, amongst some people, there quite a lot of people, the social importance of church, and they're not drinking alcohol. And especially after a farm visit and things, you'd want to, on a hot dry day, you'd want a beer, and they would have iced tea, and you got used to that. And other friends did enjoy a glass of wine, and so it's not everybody, but it's a big cultural factor. So if you go to see people for dinner, you're much safer taking a box of chocolates than a bottle of wine, because it depends. If you haven't met the people you're visiting before. So that was a big difference. I think the attitude to the world. The US is an amazing country, and it's so diverse in its geography and its sort of local cultures in a way. And the Midwest, is more than one culture really in and of itself, and then the coasts are quite different as well. And so it's a big diverse place, and it's quite self-sufficient. And I don't think they look a lot of people. There's a lot of Americans who are extremely aware of what's going on in the world, but there's also a lot who don't look beyond the US. And I'd say that's a bigger proportion than in Britain, say. Which sort of just culturally, people seem to take more interest in events around the world. That isn't the case necessarily in the US.
Same question for Australia, because you spent some time in Australia again with Monsanto. Did you notice, what were the cultural changes you noticed there between them and the UK?
Sure. Well, a bit less really. I think I found it. I love the importance of agriculture to the culture and the nation. And that's really, really exciting. And they can't take it for granted, because still they're closer to the farm. So generationally, farming is more important, but still, most people don't farm. And so they've got, the industry's got to work on communicating and maintaining that position culturally if it can. But that was exciting. I think the people in Australia love a beer, so there's no problem there. The scale of the place, the links to Britain, I was fascinated by that. So when we first arrived in 2003, there'd be adverts on the telly in Melbourne for a big department store having a sale of Manchester. And what they meant by that was bed sheets and cotton things, towels, and, which would have come from Manchester. And this was 2003.
Wow.
But that was described as Manchester. And to be honest, I think that might have changed even now. So just in the last 20 years, I'm not sure. I think that might be a generational thing. So that's changing. That the sort of the frame of reference of Australia, was the Commonwealth and Britain. But it's very much been changing over time towards Japan as its main trading partner, and now China as its main trading partner, and Asia.
Working in communications in any business, however big or small, always has its challenges, but generally these are, when it comes down to it, the crux of it is working with people and people's opinions on various different topics in various different guises. What are some of the things that you've learnt about dealing with people, and that could be people who are on your team, so to speak. It could be people who are attacking something, or going against something that you've said or done.
Sure. I think some listening to understand what they want, what are their interests. That's important, and whether that's an employee, and don't assume you know what they want. That's the place to start. Or don't guess or imagine. Listen to what they say and how they behave and what they do, and form a view on what they want. If it's an employee and a team member, and you're trying to coach them and help them and understand, and if it's a an outside group wanting a say on what you're doing as a business, or set the same, and there's almost always much more common ground than is apparent. So I'd say effective communications has got to start with effective listening. What looks like progress to them. That's the start, and then is there a fit? What are we doing? And then you can start to work from there.
So based on that, what was progress for Monsanto's customers, and did that change as you progressed through?
Sure.
Company?
I mean, I think initially the products were selling themselves. That the first round of sort of Roundup Ready soybeans with and this is a key difference, that Monsanto was always very focused on its a business that has four audiences: their employees, their customers, their owners, probably shareholders in case Monsanto, and then wider society. And Monsanto was very focused on those first three: employees, customers, shareholders. Wider society, what's the angle there?
Yep.
But that is important, and that was a Monsanto worked at it, but in hindsight, not enough, or not effectively enough, I think, and because it focused very, very tightly on those first three. And
were you aware of that at the time? Was that in your consciousness?
No, and a lot of my role was on the wider society piece. So I thought, we were doing our best, but it was I think it needed more of a balanced corporate effort, not this small team, to just explain what we're doing.
Yeah.
But for a bigger part of the corporate effort to be involved in understanding what society wanted from farming, and making sure we were working with the grain of that. And clearly society wants a lot from farming, every day. So we all know that. Yeah, we ought to be able to make it work. But you've got to clearly understand that, and make sure you've got messages and channels of communication that can really connect with that. So I think that was fascinating, in the role there.
At a time when the agricultural world seems to be increasingly polarizing, between increased intensification as one particular model and more agroecological based farming on the other, and that is broadening the church massively. There are lots and lots and umpteen million different models out there. Are you confident in the future of, I suppose, glyphosate in particular? Let's learn towards glyphosate, but I suppose what it represents, because glyphosate, in terms of the story of glyphosate, represents an entire model of farming, really.
Look, I think glyphosate's been a very important molecule for farming and wider society, and will continue to be if we manage it well and steward it well. Farming needs tools, right from horse-drawn, tools and the basic equipment, through to modern machinery and internal combustion powered heavy machinery, and digital tools and data. And glyphosate is just a tool, and all of those tools have side effects, be they land required to grow the oats to feed the horses, or CO2 emissions from diesel powered tools, to soil damage and disturbance from pulling steel through it and turning it over, to invasive species, presence from moving plants around the world, or creating an environment where certain species, there are shifts in populations because of changes. So we shouldn't. I don't see why we should be prejudiced against chemicals. The chemistry, is an important subject. They're the building blocks of all life. We use a lot of chemicals very happily in our lives. I recognize we've demonized a class of chemicals we call pesticides. We can improve technologies to target them better. We can potentially research better molecules that have less side effects and are better targeted. But I don't see a better product than glyphosate coming along in the short term, because it is very effective against plants, but has a very low toxicity to non-plants. It's off patent, so it's readily available. The people are familiar with it. It's got a lot of advantages. To discard it because it's an unfashionable class of tool would be reckless beyond belief.
Yeah, I was going to say. I mean, can you seriously envision a world without it? Do you think that there's there's a lot of talk about it, but can you actually see a time when it might be? Take Europe as an example. That there might actually be a ban.
Well, I just why would they increase their carbon footprint to that degree? Because you're either imposing a big cut in productivity on farming, or if farmers attempt to recover the lost production, they do more cultivations with much more CO2 output. They do much more soil disturbance with less ability to retain organic matter in the soil. They have less effective weed control, so more competition in the crop, maybe more weed seeds, slightly lower quality samples. They introduce a whole range of problems and challenges which require other interventions to solve. And nobody is made safer by them. There isn't a population that is being damaged by glyphosate that would show a benefit from its removal. It would be contrary to all the, we talked about interests before. Society wants to see less CO2 output, wants to see smaller areas of land farmed, wants to see good quality food at an affordable price. I think glyphosate supports that, and the controversy about its safety isn't well founded in scientific evidence, and people should have a choice. I support, if shoppers want to find something that didn't use it, then I'm glad they can. But for governments to say farmers shouldn't use this tool, they need to understand absolutely what they're then asking farmers to use instead, and what are the side effects of that. Because the glyphosate's well understood, well studied, and if a change were to be made, you would need to understand the trade-off. Otherwise, I would call the government irresponsible.
I am going to ask the question simply because quite a few people have been in touch asking me to, and you're probably sick to death of talking about it. But back in 2015, the International Agency for Research on Cancer, which is linked to the WHO, World Health Organization, published a paper stating that they thought that glyphosate was quite probably carcinogenic. I imagine that was quite a busy time for you.
Yeah, it was, and I mean, we've got a strong side of the story, which is that IARC isn't a regulator, which they say so on their website. They don't look at risk, which is what regulators look at. They say they look at hazard, which means, do they think there's any circumstances in which the things they examine could be dangerous, could pose this risk, not is it likely they'll actually pose it. And lastly, and most importantly, they didn't look at all the evidence, and they were very open about this. The biggest and best study on glyphosate and many other crop protection product safety is a big US study called the Agricultural Health Study, which has been going since the early 90s, 1993, funded by the US government, and specifically designed to look at possible health implications from pesticide exposure. And it's designed by clinicians. It's funded by the US government. It's totally independent, and it's very, very good science. They started looking at glyphosate in 1983. They had tens of thousands of farmer participants, but they didn't used to publish their data
Right. Okay.
in traditional journals.
Yeah.
They would make it available, and it was available to regulators. It was available to the scientific community interested in glyphosate, but they didn't kind of submit papers to journals in the traditional way. And that was the excuse that IARC used to ignore it, to leave it out from their study. And there's even a media interview where one of the scientists on their review group back from 2015 said, had they considered it, they probably would have come to a different conclusion. And that study gives glyphosate a clean bill of health from a cancer perspective, and as do all the regulators, because it's not just that study. That's a very large, long-term, statistically powerful study, but other studies also back it up and show the same thing, that there isn't reason to think glyphosate poses a carcinogenic risk. So the response to IARC is to look at all the regulators around the world who've looked at glyphosate and asked, is it carcinogenic, and have concluded no, including since IARC came out with that paper. If IARC behaved like a scientific organization, they would have seen the two European regulators, EFSA and European Chemicals Agency, in 2016 and 2017 say, we disagree with IARC. We don't think glyphosate is carcinogenic. Or the Canadian regulator in 2017 and 2019, the Brazilians in 2019, the US EPA this year, and in various preliminary findings previously, say, it is not carcinogenic. We disagree with you, IARC. If IARC was scientific, they would go, okay, well, we see what you've said, but here's why we disagree with you. Well, they haven't done that. They've stood with their 2015 publication, which has now been refuted again and again and again by regulators around the world. I think it's really confusing for consumers who see that as a headline and see it still out there. But we can point to all these regulatory findings who've looked at IARC and said, well, okay, that's interesting, but we disagree. The balance of evidence is not that there's a risk of cancer, it's that there isn't one. It's, these very large studies have ruled that out.
I should just say, for balance sake, if anyone from IARC wants to come on the podcast, you're very welcome.
Thanks, Ben. Probably enough. Yeah, rant over.
I can't have you on the show without mentioning gene editing at all. Can you see GM or gene editing being a part of British Ag, not only in our lifetimes, but much sooner than that?
I hope so. I think it's. I mean, I'm not a molecular biologist by training. I couldn't, take you through exactly what's going on when a breeder uses gene editing on a crop, and I don't think the public can either. I think they want to see a scientist that they trust using these tools, and they want to know that they're being deployed to take farming in a direction they understand and support, which means lower emissions, less land use, better targeting of crop protection, whatever it is, so that they trust that those technologies are being used to further a vision for agriculture they support. That's I think the key. If these tools do not start to become available, then I fear we won't. We will see more imports and also more talent go and farm elsewhere if people want to be producers, because there's other countries, Canada, Argentina, Australia, who are being realistic about how these technologies should be regulated. So we risk missing out if we don't introduce practical regulations.
So in June 2018, almost coming fully up to date, you joined Bayer as part of their acquisition of Monsanto. Do you think the mergers changed the story in any way? Has it changed the situation at all?
I think it's probably too soon to tell, but yes, in terms of, the experience of being an employee, we've gone from, a US based company to a German one, 20,000 employees to 100,000 or more, being only focused on agriculture at Monsanto to being 50-50 agriculture and pharmaceuticals in Bayer. So lots of really profound differences. And I think a different sort of company, Monsanto being smaller, had very fast growth targets. Bayer has ambitious growth targets, but they're not as fast as Monsanto's.
Interesting.
And that's different. In the crop science division of Bayer, so where the biggest change has happened with the acquisition of Monsanto, I think, there's lots of change, still going on. But the Monsanto had turned itself into a company predominantly focused on seeds and genetics, with some chemical products. Bayer was a company in crop science predominantly focused on crop protection chemistry with some seeds, so the other way around. So the mergers made it much more equally balanced between seeds and chemistry, and brought together both companies' investments in digital and data science, which I think is very, very exciting and developing fast as well. So yes, I mean, definitely different, and a refocus and a lot of excitement about where it's going to go.
We always close the podcast with the same two questions for every guest. The first one being, if you have a message for the public, any message at all, what would it be and why?
I would say take an interest in farming, beyond the headlines if you can. Try and grow a few things, on your windowsill or in your back garden yourself and see what happens. I grew, I'm not a huge gardener, but I did, I've had strawberries for a few years, which have been okay, but they need refreshing. This year I had courgettes, which were fantastic.
And you picked them at the right time?
They did. I got them. I got a regular supply of beautiful, normal courgette-sized courgettes until they got absolutely massacred by a grey mildew-type fungus, and it was amazing. And they're next to some tomatoes, which are still going strong. So thank you for the warm weather recently. The tomatoes are still out there doing well, but the courgettes they went from fantastic 1 week to dead, 10 days later because of this mildew. So I'd say, if you mess about with plants, you learn a lot, and it helps you understand that the wonderful quality, amazing, affordable produce, when the effort it took me to grow my courgettes, could I have sold them for what you can buy courgettes in the super? I thought, no way. So I think that's a wonderful insight into getting food from plants. And so that would be my message to the public. I think that grow a few things, and as many people do and really enjoy, and think of then transferring that to the supermarket and the value and quality we can experience there.
And a message for farmers.
Yeah, I think, as we were sort of saying about this, understand the public's interest in the non-food bits of farming and their real appetite for the understanding the countryside and the things people who work there every day kind of take for granted, and wanting to know that farmers are seeing that. They're seeing the birds nesting, the mice in the field margins, and something in ponds, on the edge of fields, and those other things in the countryside, and keep communicating about that, because I think that is our license to operate as sort of land-based businesses going forward. The public wants to know that we can be trusted with these environmental resources, and if we can, then we get the chance to grow food and run that business. But it's sort of the other way around from how farming. I think it's happening. I think there's a lot happening, and it's definitely starting to happen faster and faster. But it wasn't happening 10, 20 years ago.
That is a really interesting point. Mark, thanks so much for coming on the show. Honestly, I really appreciate your insight and your comments on everything we've covered tonight. So thank you very much.
Sure, Ben. Thank you.
Meet the farmers' friends.
Mark Buckingham. Next week on the show, I have another Buckingham, Laura Buckingham, who is arable manager and agronomist for Fram Farmers Cooperative, which is based in Suffolk. I hope you can join me then, but in the meantime, have a great week, and I'll see you next time on Meet the Farmers.